Join the conversation. Follow Jason on Twitter. And don't forget to visit the live show fan page on Facebook.
And what the narrative that the government is pushing and the one that the media has picked up on is that Bashar al-Assad, in a brazen attempt to bring this war to a swifter end, decided to launch a chemical attack in this neighborhood of rebel-held area in order to try and destroy a large chunk of the rebels that were fighting there. Now, I want to pose a question to you. That's completely possible. I don't think it's probable, but it is possible. But let me pose a question to you. You have a man like Assad, who has been blamed for using chemical weapons in the past, and let us assume for a moment that that is absolutely correct. He has, in the past, used chemical weapons. And there was a red line that Obama said he wasn't going to cross, and he crossed it using chemical weapons, and then America did nothing. And now he's in a position where for years he's been fighting for his very life. The Americans have been after him. Some in Europe have been after him. Coalition has been put themselves together in order to try and get him out of power. And everybody who wants a war with Syria says that the only option is that Assad has to go. I watched it the other day on the news. Again, Thune, Republican from Tennessee. Is that where he's from? I don't remember. But Congressman Thune said, well, the only answer is that Assad has to go. And yet Assad, in spite of it all, has been able to not only fend off the attacks and keep the Americans at bay, he's been able to have a low enough profile in fighting the war that it hasn't angered the American citizenry enough and the American Congress enough or the American president enough that he actually comes and invades like we did in Iraq and Afghanistan. So he's been able to hold them off while at the same time making alliances with Iran and Russia in order to fight the ISIS groups that are trying to take over the country. He's been able to do all of that. And not only has he been able to keep them at bay, he's actually winning the war right now. Did you know that? In December, he took back Aleppo. You guys remember the problem?
What was left of it.
What was left of it. But you remember Gary Johnson wondering what Aleppo was, because they were all concerned about what we were going to do about Aleppo. Well, it turns out that Assad, with the support of the Russians, was able to drive ISIS and these militants out of Aleppo and retake the city, which now is really just rubble. But he's got the enemy on the back foot, right? And then he does what? He decides one morning, you know what? I think I'm going to drop some chemical weapons. Now, you guys might think, this is something that I made the point many months ago in talking about Iran. I said, people like to talk about Iran as though they're irrational actors. They want to talk about Iran as though they're crazy people. They're psychopaths over there. They don't care what happens. They'll let their whole world burn to the ground. All they want is death and destruction. They don't act rationally. When in fact, you look closely at their foreign policy, you look closely at the way that they conduct themselves, you recognize, no, they're very rational actors. They're very savvy. Bashar al-Assad, despite what the media will tell you, despite what a lot of those in government would tell you, is not an irrational actor. He's not running around like a madman making decisions that he knows could cost him his life. He has been able to thread the needle on this entire war for the past 2 years. And he's not only survived, he's coming out on top. He's made alliances with the right people. He's been able to hold his enemies at bay while still defeating the encroaching rebel armies that are coming up against him. When you consider what this man has had to maneuver through both politically and on a war footing, and you recognize this is not a madman. He's not a psycho. So why on earth would he drop chemical weapons when he knows what's going to happen? Do you think that America, that our politicians that are just chomping at the bit, that Lindsey Graham and John McCain, who've been calling on his destruction and his ousting for years, are just going to sit back and let this one lie? Absolutely not. Why would he do it? It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't pass the smell test for me. Now, if you talk to Assad's people, what he will say is, well, we dropped bombs and they had a store of chemical weapons in one of these buildings and it got hit and the chemical weapons got out. We didn't drop the chemical weapons. We hit a place where those weapons were. And they just happened to go off and killed a bunch of people, but we didn't do it. He could be lying through his teeth. Assad, while being a very rational actor, is not a good person. He is a tyrannical dictator. But what they're saying happened doesn't make any sense. And I'm just laying this out for you so that as we move forward, I've just got a sneaking suspicion.
Which part are you saying doesn't make sense?
The fact that he would drop chemical weapons.
Okay, you're not saying the part where they would have done an airstrike and hit a chemical.
No, that would make sense to me. That would be plausible.
Mm-hmm.
What doesn't make sense to me is that Assad, after being able to maneuver the way he has and pushing his enemies back, would then take a step that would almost guarantee further military action by the United States and our allies.
That's what I thought. I just wanted to clarify because what was it? I mean, a couple weeks ago, U.S.-led airstrike. We dropped bomb. It ended up hitting like a truck full of explosives, killed like 200 innocent civilians. So similar type thing. It wasn't chemical weapons. We dropped a bomb. It ignited more explosives. Ended up killing a bunch of innocent
Same thing
people.
in Mosul recently. A bunch of innocent people died when we hit an area in Mosul with an airstrike.
Yeah.
So it's not unreasonable that would happen. And again, I don't ever want to be accused of defending Assad because, as I said, Assad is a tyrant. I'm just saying we've got to be very careful because we have a group of people who would like nothing more than to put us into another war.
Yes.
And it is not, if you study this stuff, if you study history, it is not outside of a lot of three-letter acronym secret spy organizations in the United States to pull off something like this. I'm not saying that the government was in collusion to try and spark a war. Maybe this was Assad dropping bombs and hit a chemical dump. But I'm telling you, him doing this doesn't pass the smell test. It makes no sense. There is no political or military advantage for him doing it. It's all bad. And now let me turn my attention to statements by Donald Trump today. I don't have the clip for you because he was literally talking about it as I was finalizing show prep today. But I know a lot of you who are libertarians ended up looking at Donald Trump and the statements he was making about foreign policy prior to his election and saying, well, at least he's not a warmonger. Right? I don't agree that he's a nationalist, he's a populist, he's a terrorist. Yeah, he'd be great, but he's not a warmonger. He's not going to get us into any more wars. And this was the excuse. And I kept thinking to myself, are you guys nuts? I mean, really? First of all, don't listen to anything they say. Watch what they do. And Donald Trump has said any number of things. He's taken any number of positions depending on when it was he was making the statement. And I said, you watch, he gets into office, you're going to see a completely different man. Now, the last time that Assad dropped chemical weapons and killed a couple of hundred people, guess what Donald Trump said? Including 100 children. Donald Trump said, President Obama, do not go into Syria. It's all downside with no upside. This is what he said. And we thought, a lot of you I know, thought that you were going to be hiring and putting into power a man who was very anti-war. And what you see today is that exactly the opposite is true. Donald Trump got out in front of the microphones and says, my opinion about Assad has completely changed. And don't be surprised if the government moves to take action against Assad now that this has happened. And you're going to see the man who said he wasn't going to get us into any more wars, who said he was against the war in Iraq and who didn't like Afghanistan and was against the war in Syria. Now you're going to see him do what every president does, which is escalate. It is absolutely disgusting, but it was completely predictable.